this is attorney Elizabeth Potts-Weinstein, and today we're going to talk about the differences between LLCs, S corporations, and C corporations, and how to tell what's the right business entity for your business. Before we get into the differences between those three different type of entities, it's important to understand that there's actually only two different type of entities that we're talking about, LLCs and corporations. This is because there are two different considerations that we're going to be discussing. One is the legal entity, LLCs or corporations, and the other is how it will be taxed, the tax status of your business. So you can have an LLC that is taxed as either a sole proprietorship or partnership, depending if it's one owner or multiple owners, an LLC that's taxed as an S Corp, or an LLC that's taxed as a C Corp. And then you can have a corporation that's taxed as an S Corp or a C Corp. So you can see it's a lot of different combinations you can have. And that's why we're going to split this up into talking about the legal entities, LLCs and corporations, and the tax statuses, whether or not you want to be just a pass-through tax entity like a sole proprietorship or partnership, you want to be taxed as an S Corp or taxed as a C Corp. When you're looking at LLCs, limited liability companies, versus corporations, the first thing you want to look at is the practical consideration. How much is it going to cost to set that up in your state or the state in where you want to form it? In some places, the filing fees between an LLC and a corporation are huge. Some places you have to do publishing of an LLC, and that's thousands of dollars. In some places, they pay different state franchise fee taxes. There's a lot of differences that are purely logistical, and you want to look at your state or the state where you want to form your business entity to see if we're talking about the same fees or thousands of dollars of different fees. Next, you need to look at the owner and what is your status. If you want to be taxed as an S corporation, the business owner has to either be a U.S. citizen or have a green card. There's also some other requirements too. But a business that has an owner who's not a citizen, doesn't have a green card, can be an LLC that's taxed as a partnership. So you have to look at the owners to see what's even possible for you before you go ahead and form an entity and then need to switch later. The third aspect is looking at your goals. So for example, do you want to raise money? You want to bring in investors, and you want those investors to be passive investors. It may make sense to form a corporation that you can have it be a C corporation, so you can have different classes of shares versus an S corporation. You might want to form an LLC with investors if the investor is someone you personally know and you're just going to have one or two investors. But if you're looking to pitch VC, you probably want to go with a corporation. I forgot one important distinction between LLCs and corporations, and that is LLCs have more simple corporate formalities. All entities have some formalities you have to observe, such as keeping everything separate, your finances separate, your personal finances separate from the LLC or the corporation's finances. But corporations have more corporate formalities, including having annual director and shareholder meetings with minutes. And if you don't do that, then you might have trouble maintaining the status of your corporation as a separate entity. A fourth aspect is just your familiarity and comfort level for these types of entities. I have some clients where they create corporations because they've had corporations before. They know how to do all the paperwork. They're very familiar with it. And so you want to look at the practical aspect of you, and you're the one who has to maintain this LLC or corporation over the years. What are you going to be comfortable doing? And the fifth aspect to think about is the type of business you have. Some businesses can only be LLCs and not corporations, or the other way around. For example, as an attorney in California, I had to form a corporation because attorneys are not allowed to be LLCs. And that's true of professionals in many states. Many states don't allow them to form LLCs, but some do. The other aspect is certain kinds of businesses are traditionally formed as LLCs or even LLPs, limited liability partnerships, which I'll talk about some other time, because it just makes more sense for the kind of business they have. They can structure it in a much easier way. For example, real estate investing businesses tend to be LLCs or LLPs instead of corporations. The next aspect is to look at the tax status. So you formed an LLC or a corporation. How would you want it to be taxed? If you have a LLC and you want it to just have the default tax status, that means it's going to be taxed as a sole proprietorship if you're only one person, or a partnership if there's multiple people who own it. The great part about that, it's the default. You don't really have to do anything. It's relatively straightforward. You can take any losses from that business and apply it against your other income in some situations if you're an active participant in that business. And that can be really helpful in the early years of a business if it's having losses at the end of the year. But one of the problems of that is if you have profits at the end of the year and you don't distribute it to the owners, you still owe taxes on it. And that can be very, very frustrating. One of the ways to solve that is to do a minimal distribution just to pay taxes, but that's something you'll have to calculate at the end of the year. Another great aspect is the taxes are comparatively simple if you're taxed as a sole proprietorship, if you're one owner, because it can just be on your Schedule C of your 1040 form, and that can be something you do yourself or you use commonly available software. If your business is an LLC or a corporation, it can be taxed as an S corporation. There are limitations on what kinds of businesses can be taxed as an S corporation based upon the status of their owners, and I talked a little bit about that before. But if you are able to claim S corporation status, this can be a great way to pay less taxes on the profits of your business. So for example, my business, my law firm, is organized as a corporation that's taxed as an S corp. When I pay myself, I can pay myself in two different ways. One way is a salary, and I pay myself a salary every week, just like when I pay my other employees. And when you pay yourself a salary as a paycheck, you're going to have, FICAs and Social Security, all that stuff come taking out of it. But I can also do distributions of the profit. Distributions of the profit is taxed differently. Specifically, you don't have to pay self-employment income taxes on it, so it can reduce your tax burden. But you can't pay just the profits to yourself as a distribution and not pay yourself a salary. The IRS knows that you want to do that, and so you have to pay yourself a legit salary if you're working in the business. Another aspect of having an LLC or corporation taxed as an S corp is that it can be easier to get certain benefits. So for example, here in the pandemic, because I have a business that's formed as a corporation that has S corp tax status, it was actually easier for me to apply to get loan from the government, from the United States federal government, than it would have been if I would have had an LLC with a pass-through tax entity. They were still able to get benefits, but they had to wait longer to apply. And another great aspect of having a business that is taxed as an S corporation, or really a C corporation, is that it's easier to generate its own credit identity. It is true that LLC is a separate entity from you personally, but I found that some banks and things don't respect it as much as they do corporations. A C corporation is a tax entity that you might think of for big giant companies. That's how they're taxed. But even a small business can choose to be taxed as a C corp. It is going to be more complicated to deal with your taxes, and that's true of an S corp to some extent too. Also, the C corp falls under double taxation, and what that means is that the corporation itself pays taxes on profits. And when it distributes those profits to the owner pays taxes. So you can actually end up paying more taxes because you pay taxes twice. But there are a lot of benefits to having a C Corp. One of the big benefits is that a C corporation can leave assets in the business and the owner doesn't have to pay taxes on those profits. So if you have a business where you're going to be reinvesting every dime you make into research and development or expansion, for example, the owner doesn't have to pay taxes on the profits each year, even though the owner doesn't get any of them, because the corporation can hold on to those profits and reinvest them year after year. Another aspect that some of my clients use is that you can have better fringe benefits as an owner and for all your employees as a C corporation than as an S corporation. Also with a C corporation, you can have as many owners as you want. You're just having the owners be shareholders. They own the stock. For S corporation, there's a limit on the number, but for a C corporation, it can be as many shares as you distribute. And so if you want to have a lot of investors, passive investors who aren't really active in the business, if you want to get venture capital, if you want to go public someday, a C corporation is probably the right choice for you eventually. The bottom line is whether you should have an LLC or a corporation and whether your business should be taxed as a pass-through entity like a sole proprietorship or partnership, or taxed as an S Corp or taxed as a C Corp, really depends upon your situation, your current tax burden, and the goals for the future of your business. Again, this is attorney Elizabeth Potts-Weinstein. If you found this video helpful, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more legal information for small business owners. And if you have any questions or comments about LLCs versus S Corps versus C Corps, feel free to go ahead and ask them below and I'll try to point you in the right direction. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye-bye.